A local crime-fighting program aimed at gangs is getting international attention. The Community Initiative to Reduce Violence in Glasgow, Scotland, is modeled after the Cincinnati Initiative to Reduce Violence. Angela Ingram joins us at the University of Cincinnati, where a man from Scotland is visiting. Angela.
Well, Rob, he was here today, as you said, and he tells me a few years ago, officers from Scotland, police officers, came over here to meet with Cincinnati officers. They wanted to know what they could do about gang violence, and they were interested in our CIRV program. Well, now Ross and also a professor from UC are working together to study both programs.
Welcome back to our lovely city.
Thank you.
Ross Deuchar is far from home, meeting with city leaders and members of CIRV.
I've been out in the community, talked to local people on the streets, in places like over the Rhine, and also I've met with some offenders as well who are currently on probation.
The professor is from the University of the West of Scotland. He's in Cincinnati for a week. Scotland's CIRV program was modeled after ours to deal with gang violence.
If we really want to have an impact on violent crime, this initiative is the way to do it.
Ross is noticing similarities between gang-related crime, but there are differences. Where much of our crime involves guns, Ross sees different methods in his home.
They might use swords, they might use bottles, bricks for the violence, but not really firearms.
There are also differences in who's typically involved.
It's predominantly young white men that are involved in the violence in the west of Scotland compared to the black young men that are involved in more of the violence here.
And what we're finding is that the underlying causes of the violence are really not about race. It's really about poverty and lack of education, lack of opportunities.
Professor Robin Engel is writing a book with Ross comparing the two CIRVs, and so far both programs have been successful.
We've had a 50% reduction in violent offending in the areas where CIRV has been implemented in the west of Scotland. There's been, something like a 42-45% reduction here. So it's having the same positive benefits in two very diverse settings.
And Councilman Cecil Thomas tells me that he's recently gotten phone calls from people in other cities interested, phone calls from Toledo and also New Orleans. They would like CIRV programs in their cities as well. Reporting live, Angela Ingram, Local 12 News. Rob, back to you.
Angela, thanks very much. Very interesting. CIRV's funding was cut last year, as you know. Yesterday, City Council voted to give CIRV more to restore all their funding at $250,000. Glasgow's CIRV program recently had its funding slashed despite its success.
The first question is just for you to say and spell your first and last name for me on tape.
Okay, it's Ross Deuchar, and I'm from the University of the West of Scotland in the UK.
Wow. How do you spell your last name, sir?
It's Deuchar.
So why are you here?
Well, I'm here because the Cincinnati Initiative to Reduce Violence was the stimulus for our own initiative in Glasgow in the west of Scotland to try and curb gang violence. We have our own version of CIRV across there. Police officers, senior police officers from Scotland came over here around about 2007 and 2008, and looked at the whole initiative here and brought back the principles and created our own version of the initiative. And so I'm here to look at the type of gang violence that there is here, comparing what happens in Scotland and looking at the initiative and how it's being implemented in both cities. Two cities that are very diverse, very different in nature, but experiencing the same level of success in terms of the reductions in gang-related activity.
Is it interesting? What are some of the parallels you're seeing, and what things are you seeing that are different from your country?
Well, in terms of the violence, the focus is very different because in Scotland we don't have gun crime, really. There might be a very, very occasional incident that involves a gun, but what we have is knife crime and violence related to knife crime. They might use swords, they might use bottles, bricks for the violence, but not really firearms. And also, it's predominantly young white men that are involved in the violence in the west of Scotland compared to the black young men that are involved in more of the violence here. But I think at the root of it is are the same issues. It's poverty, unemployment, social deprivation and disadvantage that leads to the young men in Scotland participating in these activities. So that's the similarities and the differences. In terms of the CIRV initiative, very similar approaches have been used. We've had call-in sessions where we've brought the offenders into the sheriff courts and given them the same anti-violence message, the same message of enforcement. We have a gangs task force in Scotland as well. And we also have the moral voice of the community, young mums coming in, talking to the gang members, trying to convince them to move away from the violence, and also the social services component where they are fast-tracked into social services if they're prepared to leave the violence behind.
So what experiences have you had while you were here? Because when I met you, you were walking the neighborhoods. What else have you done?
I've worked with the Cincinnati Police Department. I've been on ride-alongs with them. I've interviewed senior and operational police officers, both undercover and overt police squad members. I've also been with the street advocates and met with them. I've been out in the community, talked to local people on the streets in places like over the Rhine, and also I've met with some offenders as well who are currently on probation.
What are you? I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know whether do you want me to say about the insights I've had from those things?
What thoughts have you had?
Yeah. I think there's lots of different issues. I think sometimes offenders, local people kind of jump on the race issue, that race is at the heart of it, and it's to do with the African American disadvantage and so on. But I think when you dig deeper, what's really at the root of it is, there are issues that relate to race, but I think that's not the fundamental cause of the violence. What the fundamental cause seems to be is the disadvantage, the unemployment, the lack of job opportunities, the poverty, the frustration that these young people and community members feel. And I think a lot of the offenders talk about the fact that they feel now they have to have a gun with them when they go out because the next man's got a gun, and they feel threatened. So it's almost as a means of protection. So it's a kind of vicious circle that's been created. And of course, the fact that it's revolving around the drug trade as well, which is different again from Scotland because the violence there tends to be more recreational. It's about defending the housing estate where you come from and going out and engaging in violence for that reason. And they might take recreational drugs, but it's not really revolving around the making of money through the drug trade.
So one last question for you. Are you coming back?
I'd love to come back, yeah, I'd love to come back. I mean, Dr. Engel from the University of Cincinnati and myself are writing a book on this data, looking at the causes and the effects of the violence, and most importantly looking at the CIRV initiative and the hope it's providing, because we've had a 50% reduction in violent offending in the areas where CIRV has been implemented in the west of Scotland. There's been something like a 45% reduction here. So it's having the same positive benefits in two very diverse settings, and I think it'll make a great stimulus for a book, and so we're collaborating closely on that just now.
Great. Is there anything I left out that you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think we've covered everything. Yeah.